Welcome, folks, to Accelerate Your Cloud Journey with AWS Transform. My name is Ryan Forger. I am a technical instructor here at AWS. I actually have a few different titles, but I'll go into intros in just a moment. With a show of hands, how many of you have been to a silent session before? Okay, so many of you know the drill. Usually, these sessions are competitions. Our goal is to look like we're having so much fun that every other session wants to join ours and change their headphone color. Unfortunately, it looks like our neighbors are maybe doing a session a little bit behind us, so we'll still make sure we're looking like we're having fun, but that's normally the goal of the silent sessions. Just to give you a little bit of background about myself, I am a senior technical instructor here at AWS. They gave me the senior title as soon as my gray hair started to show up. I've been doing that for about 5.5 years now. My specialty is in teaching our generative AI and machine learning courses. I also have a secondary role that I've been doing for about 2 years now, 2.5 years, which is as a training customer success manager. So goal of that role is to help build out longer-term strategy and enablement plans for our customers, leveraging things like our Skill Builder platform for on-demand training, as well as your instructor-led live sessions. I currently live in Boston, Massachusetts. Before AWS, I was getting a degree in computer science and physics from Holy Cross over in Worcester, Mass. Outside of AWS, I like to do really anything that gets me away from my computer screen, away from the presentation setup. Most notably, my favorite thing to do is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And if you've seen me limping around the reInvent campus, that may or may not have something to do with jiu-jitsu. I had ACL surgery back in September, so still relearning to walk, but we're here nonetheless. No skiing this year, unfortunately, but we'll be back to full activity. I think in May is the goal. We'll be back to jiu-jitsu. So if anybody wants to talk about that after the session, more than happy to. I also can't pass up the intro slide without showing off. I have a wonderful 6-year-old golden retriever yellow lab mix. His name is Kenai. He is the goodest boy ever. Honestly, one of my favorite things about my role as an instructor is that I get to, well, at least this is what I tell myself to get up every day, but I get to help people make their lives a little bit easier. And I'm probably most excited for this session out of all of the ones that I'm either presenting at or supporting this year, because Transform is a really cool service. If you haven't used it already, it is going to be a mechanism to make your lives a lot easier. With a show of hands, how many of you have, at some scale, shape, or form, gone through a migration process? Okay, so many of you, keep your hands up if at some point you had a headache during that process. Okay, about the same number of hands. The goal of AWS Transform is going to be to lower those hands, to reduce the number of headaches that you see day in and day out. Our agenda is going to be discussing the challenges, right? Why is Transform useful? What is it going to be used for? We're going to go over kind of an overview of the service itself. We're going to see some customer success stories. It's actually funny. One of our customer success stories was just over in, I believe, the Blue Theater a few minutes ago, the Hartford. And we'll see them coming up on a slide towards the end of the session. And then at the very end, I'm going to demo some of the stuff we have in Skill Builder that will help you to get hands-on with the service. And Q&A is a little bit harder for the silent sessions, but I very much encourage questions. I love to interact with my audience. So after the session, if we have time, feel free to come over and ask questions over here. If we have to move out for another session, you'll find me in the hallway. I'll stick around for a bit in case anybody wants to dig deeper. But let's get into it. Right? For those of you who have had those headaches in terms of migrations, this will be no surprise. When it comes to any type of transition, right, there's going to be friction. In terms of moving into a cloud environment, our conversation today is mainly on migration and modernization, both being equally important in the conversation. Migration is the act of getting from one place to another, but modernization is how we become cloud optimized. You'll hear this in any one of our live instructor-led sessions, but if you are building on AWS, there are 1,000,001 different ways that you could build the same solution on AWS with different services, different tech stacks, different ways of using services to interact with one another, right? Maybe you're doing it with fully managed services or unmanaged services or fully serverless, right? There's a million and one different ways to build. But it doesn't necessarily mean that all of those ways are cloud optimized. So we want to teach best practices for building, for designing your applications so that you can get all of the cloud benefits possible, right? And that's where Transform is going to come into play. So from a migration standpoint, slow transformation, right? It can take a long time to even identify what you need to move to the cloud. You might have a ton of different applications. You might have some that need to remain on-premise, others that need to go in waves. It's a long process to even identify what you need to move. And then once it's identified, going in and manually switching all of that over is a lengthy process, especially if you have to update legacy code bases and make sure you're using newer libraries or refactoring to be more cloud optimized, maybe moving from kind of a monolithic application structure into a microservice-based application structure. It's a lot of time. It's also limited scalability. If you are working with these different applications, migrating these different applications, you are normally doing them one at a time or maybe in waves, but you can't do them all at once. So it takes even longer to get these applications into the cloud because of bottlenecks, right? We can only do so much in so little time. So that's another one of the goals of Transform is trying to make you a little bit more efficient, right? Make you a little bit more scalable, you or your teams, right? That's going to be a big conversation in any Gen AI, either class or bit of documentation that you're reading in, is generative AI should be a tool to make you more efficient. It's not there to replace your jobs. It's to make sure that you have less redundant work to be able to do. It's also the idea that scarcity of legacy knowledge bases are shrinking, right? If you have a legacy mainframe application or .NET application or VMware workloads running on-premise, you need people who have experience in both the on-prem worlds and the AWS worlds when you are undergoing a migration. So we need some tooling, we need some mechanisms to make it a bit easier for you to bridge those gaps, right? Get from on-prem to AWS in a seamless way, and hopefully do it with a little Gen AI to make your lives a bit easier. That's where Transform is going to come into play. Right? AWS Transform is going to be our first agentic AI service for large-scale migration and modernization. Right? Those are the two biggest points of this session, migration and modernization. Again, I'll say it probably 4 more times before this session is through, but migration is one piece. Modernization is equally as important. It's getting you to be as cloud optimized as possible. Now, there's a few different components of Transform that we are going to discuss in the session, mainly focused on the different types of agents that you can leverage within the system. Now, I want to give a little bit of an overview related to artificial intelligence, Gen AI, before we dive into the actual service. Today, AI is obviously the hot new topic that everybody wants to discuss. I think terminology is really important. Artificial intelligence being kind of the overall domain, right? It's a computer system that we've designed to mimic some type of human thinking. And artificial intelligence, just an AI, can actually be pretty basic, pretty rudimentary. It could be something that you program just with conditional statements. If somebody clicks this button, we're going to recommend them this item. Right? It's a very simple version of mimicking human thinking. But where it gets more relevant, where it gets more exciting is as we start to progress into things like machine learning. Right? Machine learning is the idea that we're training a system to make predictions. Right? Be able to say, hey, I want to train on this data set of historical rent prices in Boston so that I can predict what the rent price is going to be in Boston in 5 years. I actually might not want to do that because it would probably make my head explode. But you could do it. Right? Predict something that can happen in the future based on historical data. Generative AI and agentic AI is going even deeper. Right? Here you'll talk about foundational models and all these crazy terms, but a foundational model is just a large machine learning model that we've trained on internet scale data. It's trying to give it a general understanding of human language, of our knowledge bases that are in the internet. Right? So foundational model has been trained on a lot of things, and we're using that foundational model. We're asking it questions to produce net new content. right? Sometimes you're producing images, other times you're producing reviews, other times you're producing code, for example. Transform is going to be a mechanism to leverage generative AI for your migration process. So one of the main ideas there is when you're leveraging a foundational model, asking good questions is probably the most important piece of the puzzle. Right? If you ask it a garbage question, you're going to get a garbage answer back out. So moving from Gen AI to agentic AI solutions, we have these processes to lead you in the right direction to asking models better questions. Right? When we're asking questions, sometimes we need to provide more context. Hey, foundational model, I want you to summarize this story for the high school, capstone report and give me my final paper. Right? But you have to provide it that content so that it can give you. We actually probably shouldn't be ethically using AI for our final papers. But that's another conversation for another day. But you have to provide it with the context so that it can answer your question effectively. Agentic AI is leveraging things like chatbots so that we have a little bit more structure to how we are asking good questions. So what we'll see in Transform is all of these different mechanisms are going to have agents. We're going to see examples with VMware, right? If you're migrating VMware applications to something like EC2, if you're migrating legacy mainframe applications, say you're trying to translate COBOL code into more up-to-date Java code for your applications and run that on EC2. Or if you're trying to upgrade .NET applications to a newer version of .NET, or maybe you're transitioning from a .NET application running on Windows into something on Linux so that you can reduce your licensing costs. All of these different mechanisms are going to have an agent that you interact with, have a conversation with, to streamline the migration process. Once it has all of its information, that's when it's going to start to do the actual transformations for you, right? Take that COBOL code and translate it into Java, or find all of your application dependencies and figure out a way of planning the migration in waves so that everything goes according to plan. So a lot to see. We're going to dive into it. We're going to see some examples of a .NET to .NET upgrade towards the end of the session. You'll also be able to do it hands-on in Skill Builder. And I'll show you how to do that as we get towards the end of our presentation here today. So my call to action for all of you in the audience, and also for you who are watching remotely on video, is going to be to, if you haven't already, create your Skill Builder account. And there's going to be a lab tutorial. This is a newer offering in the platform. Typically, our lab environments are going to vend you out an account for you to work in. The lab tutorial is actually going to be in our free tier, available for everybody to leverage, but you are going to have to run them in your own AWS account. Now, there's some caveats there. We're going to talk about it. In theory, if you follow all of the instructions, it shouldn't incur any charges. You want to make sure you clean everything up at the end, just to keep everything keep everything happy. But this should be a mechanism for everybody to get hands-on with Transform, and within a matter of minutes, transform thousands of lines of code. So really cool. We'll see it in a few minutes. Let's continue with the slides. So Transform, orchestrated intelligence. When we're working with Transform, you can either use it in something like Visual Studio, right? Install the plugin and use it on your local machine. There also is a unified web experience that actually was updated as of yesterday. So some of our slide screenshots are going to be a little bit out of date, but I'll show you the new stuff when we get into the lab in just a moment. But the unified experience is a great way for you to interact with a team. If you are not the only one that's going to be implementing this migration process, that collaboration is going to be really important. End-to-end automation, again, it's going to walk you through task by task exactly what needs to happen to undergo the migration process or to transform your legacy code. Again, specialized agents. There are agents for the different types of tasks. I will also back up for just a moment to say, if we go back to our previous slide, VMware, mainframe, .NET, those are the ones that we are focusing on for this session. But as of this week, there are some more updates to the service. .NET is actually going to be kind of a full stack Windows transform agent. So now it's not just the .NET application. It's not just the the application code, you can also start to migrate things like your databases. And so I'm happy to point people towards that update and that release at the end of the session if you're looking to dive deeper into that one. We also have the option for custom code. So if you have your own custom way of developing within your organization, we have another option for you that is generally available in US East 1 as of yesterday. So always exciting new stuff coming out. Okay, goal-driven, human-in-the-loop, collaboration simplified. Again, this is you interacting with that agentic AI tooling to ask good questions and provide the right repositories or documentation for your migration process. Okay. When it comes to migrations, there's typically kind of 3 different areas that we need to talk about. Infrastructure migration is, okay, well, where are we going to be running our systems once we get into the cloud? Right? Are you, say, VMware-wise, are you moving from VMware on-premise to VMware on AWS? Are you moving from VMware to EC2? Are you doing more of a refactoring of your applications and moving to a microservice architecture or a serverless architecture via Lambda? Right? What is your code, what is your application going to live on top of? We also have the application modernization as part of that, right? It's if we are redesigning our code to be more cloud optimized, can we start leveraging more microservices? Can we break down a monolithic code base into more of a microservice architecture? Leverage a series of Lambda functions rather than maybe a single virtual machine. And then software updates, right? In the world of technology, software updates are half the job, keeping things up to date, keeping things secure and patched and upgraded, updated, maybe even more than half the battle, right? 70%. So Transform is going to help us to do that as well. Transform capabilities, key benefits, simplified migration planning. So it's all going to start with an assessment. It's going to help you to identify what you have to migrate and what is the best mechanism to migrate it. So you don't even have to be the one that identifies all the things that need to be migrated. Reducing costs in that assessment is going to give you a financial forecast of where there might be some opportunities to actually see performance improvements in terms of your overall bill. That could include something like if you're going from a .NET application that's a Windows-based application, moving over to Linux and reducing those licensing costs, right? So we'll help you to reduce your cost and obviously improve efficiency is the whole reason we are here. Okay, VMware agent, right? Again, Transform is going to have purpose-built agents. VMware, .NET, and mainframe are going to be the ones that we are focused on in this session. But again, there are those custom agents as well as the broader scale Windows transformation agent that is out as of this week. So if you're trying to modernize VM workloads to EC2, this is going to be your mechanism to do so. I like to emphasize on this one elimination of third-party licensing fees. Again, if you're trying to move away from a VMware workload and run on, say, EC2, or maybe run in a more containerized fashion via ECS or EKS powered by EC2, container-based workloads, you can do that as well. And once you get into the cloud, you have the full suite of cloud optimization opportunities. If you're starting to leverage things like EC2, that's where we can start to go from on-premise mentality of, well, if I need more infrastructure, I have to go through the procurement process that takes weeks or months or years, maybe even longer, depending on what you're trying to procure. If you procured the wrong things, it takes a long time to fix your mistake, and it was a lot of upfront cost. Maybe you provisioned too much infrastructure, and now you are left with a bill that doesn't have an equal amount of usage on your platform. Right? There's a lot of problems on premise. Once we are in the cloud, once we're leveraging things like EC2, we can be more elastic. We can get the benefits of the cloud. We can start leveraging kind of the 3 musketeers of auto-scaling, which is going to be CloudFront for monitoring. Right? CloudFront's going to be your mechanism for identifying when you need to scale, auto-scaling groups to implement the actual changes in capacity to your fleets, and then things like elastic load balancers to distribute the traffic evenly across your resources. So again, Transform is going to help you to get on to the cloud, but then it's still our responsibility to make sure that we have good architecting practices once we are living in the cloud. Right? Operational excellence is this idea. It's one of our well-architected pillars, but it's the idea that we're improving continuously over time. I would even go as far to say is if you had an application that was especially the week of reInvent, but if you had an application that was cloud optimized today, right, the most perfect, the most optimal solution possible, there could be a service that comes out tomorrow that will run your application faster, cheaper, more secure, right, more fault tolerant. So you always want to be improving, right? Transform is going to help us do that as well. Transform agent for mainframe, right? Legacy systems can be massive and on average take about 18 months, if not more, to get anything actually moved over to a new environment. So if you're trying to do something like refactor COBOL code into something more up-to-date, Java, for example, you can be translating thousands of lines of code in a matter of minutes, even millions, depending on the scale of the repository that you provide. .NET. This is the one we're going to see in terms of the demo that's coming up. So we're going to see a .NET to .NET update, upgrade. So we'll see this one in a few minutes. So I won't spend as much time on this slide. OK, getting started with Transform. The process is actually pretty easy. In a matter of minutes, and that is a promise if you're using Skill Builder and what we're talking about here. In a matter of minutes, you can go from a repository of old .NET code in GitHub to an updated, I think it's 7,000 lines of code that the lab goes through. We could see the exact number in just a moment. But it'll walk you through the process of that whole transition, right? That agent-based solution. You start by, one, activating Transform in the console. You have to enable it, make sure that you have access in terms of your IAM permissions. The way you actually leverage Transform in terms of that unified interface is you need to have an Active Directory, or you're going to be using AWS Identity Center as the mechanism for your Active Directory, for your authentication, who's able to actually leverage the Transform service. You're going to connect your source code repositories so that it can start to do some of those assessments, determine what actually needs to be moved, help you do some wave planning. And then once you have validated the changes that Transform recommends to make, it will do it all for you. Best practices for success. Start small, right? If you have a large-scale migration for your entire organization to get from on-premise to 100% in the cloud, I wouldn't recommend you do it all at once immediately. Start small, go with a MVP, some kind of small project first. Make sure you build up some skills. Agentic AI is a very powerful tool that can make you very efficient, but it's still important to know how it works, what could break it, what could cause issues or errors. So making sure you start small. I would say starting with that Skill Builder lab, that lab walkthrough, the tutorial that shows you exactly what to do, is a great starting point. Then you can move over to something that is more relevant to your own businesses, but start small, right? We want to make sure that you have the expertise, the experience to leverage Transform effectively. And always make sure you're reviewing and testing. One mechanism we didn't really mention yet is part of that transition job or transformation job that it creates will be to do unit testing as well. So automated unit testing is all part of the process. OK, starting too big. Again, this is similar to the last slide. Starting too big can be an issue. You want to make sure you grow your skills first. Don't skip the assessment. Again, the assessment within AWS Transform is going to help you build the business case for why we want to move to the cloud, both from a transformation, like technology perspective, but also from a financial perspective, right? Maybe one of the reasons you want to move to the cloud is to eliminate, 50% of those licensing costs from, say, a Windows-based server to Linux, right? Customer success. This one is really cool. Thomas Reuters, there's a great video on the AWS YouTube channel if you want to dive a little bit deeper into their success story, but this one's really cool. Since May, these guys have been transforming 1.5 million lines of code per month. Right? That's not per quarter, not per year, it's per month that they've been transferring their lines of code. And the AWS Transform team has been an extension of their internal teams. It's been very easy for them to go in and start to leverage the service. So again, they had a legacy .NET application that needed to move over to AWS, and overall helped to reduce 70% of their technical debt. It's a term we have not talked about, I don't think, yet today. I've mentioned it a lot already this week, but I don't think in this session. Technical debt is the chores that you've put off for a long time that keep growing and growing. It's the garage that you say you're going to clean every weekend, and it piles up for 20 years, and then it becomes impossible. That's technical debt, right? It's when you have old legacy systems that have slowly gotten older and older, and now you need to make a transition, but that transition becomes a lot harder because things are so out of date. It takes a lot more people power and people hours to get that transition completed. So reducing technical debt is one of, if not the most important goal of AWS Transform. There was actually, you may or may not have seen it, there was a lovely symbolic gesture of reducing technical debt. From this conference, we took a server rack that was being decommissioned and we blew it up. It was an explosion. I encourage you to watch the video. It was pretty cool, but it was a symbolic gesture of getting rid of your technical debt. Okay, the Hartford. Our friends were over there in the Blue Theater. It might be still going on, but it was happening while we were setting up. These folks were doing a very similar migration to the one you will see in the Skill Builder lab. They were modernizing their vendor management application that was using .NET Framework 4.8, and it needed to be transitioned over to .NET Framework 8.0. If you were doing that all manually, transitioning .NET frameworks is going to throw hundreds, thousands, if not more errors that traditionally you would have to go through line by line and manually fix yourself. That sounds like a very time-consuming and headache-inducing, and my eyeballs hurt just thinking about it. Transform can fix that all for you. So in this case, they transformed 7,870 lines of code within initial hours of adoption. It was 30% of the application's code base, and since then have migrated 4 separate core projects. Toyota Motors. This was another big one. This was an example of mainframe modernization. So here they were looking to transition 40 million lines of COBOL legacy code. They used Q Business as part of this process. One additional detail that we have not talked about yet, I don't think, is that as part of the transition, Transform will also generate technical documentation, which is really important, right? We've all heard the story of, or maybe you've been a part of it, of the developer who created the application and managed and updated it for 20 years and then ended up retiring or leaving for another company, and then nobody knows how the application works. Well, that's not ideal, right? Part of the GenAI solution is going to be to generate technical documentation so that you know what all of the code base is actually going to be implementing, what is it actually going to be doing. So that was a big part of the Toyota Motors customer success story as well. Okay, these next couple slides are going to be going through demo of the actual tool itself. I will preface this conversation with the UI looks a little bit different as of today. So I'll go through these slides a little bit quicker, and then we're actually going to see what it looks like in the live environment. But it all starts with a conversation. You'll notice on the left-hand side of this, right-hand side of the screen, stage left, the right-hand side of the screen, you're interacting with a GenAI chatbot. You're asking questions for it to help you with your migration process. The first question could be as simple as, hey, I have a .NET application that I need to migrate. What are my next steps? And the process begins. It's going to create a .NET migration or transformation job, and then start to walk you through all of the different pieces of that transformation job. Kind of going back to our initial setup of, well, you need to grant permissions, right? Who's going to be responsible for this job? You're going to need to identify where your code lives, so where the repositories are. The one you will see in the lab is going to be a GitHub repository that's connected to AWS Transform via code pipeline connectors. So all of that you'll be able to do hands-on. The lab will take about 60 to 90 minutes, depending on how much of there's presentations in the skill builder labs as well. So I encourage you, if you're fairly new to Transform, to go and watch those as well. But it'll walk you through that whole process of creating a GitHub repository with data already in it, connecting it via code pipeline to AWS Transform, making sure you have all the proper identity center permissions to get in, and then it's going to go through that assessment and discovery phase. Selecting a transformation plan. This is good to call out. The transformation plan is going to be something that is created by Transform after it goes through your code repository. It's going to have kind of a suggested plan of, hey, this is what we think, these are the changes that we think need to be made for this code base. You can also customize it, right? You can go in and say, well, I want to make sure that we're focusing on, this component of the application first. Maybe you're doing some kind of migration wave planning. There's dependencies, and you need to move certain applications before others. It will help you to identify those things, but you can also customize it if the actual plan that Transform creates isn't exactly up to your qualifications. Visual Studio integration. Again, if you're not using the web interface, you can use Visual Studio. But again, if you are trying to work in a more collaborative environment, I definitely encourage you to be using that web interface. Transformation summary and results. It's going to tell you exactly what changed. When it creates the output, it's going to commit any transformed content to a separate branch so that you can review it before it ends up getting, if you want to merge it to the rest of your code base, but it gets separated there. You get a full rundown of what was changed, what was updated, how much code, were there any failures. If you do any unit testing, it will also include any of that information. Private NuGet package support. So if you are leveraging your own private packages, Transform can handle those as well. We'll see kind of a description of that in the lab. Automated unit testing. This one is actually not part of the Skill Builder lab, but the idea is pretty simple here. It's once the code has been transformed, you want to make sure it works. So Transform can run it against unit tests to make sure there are no errors, that's not going to break once it's actually in use, which is a pretty important part of the process. Comprehensive transformation summary. You can get this programmatically in the CLI or via Visual Studio. If you're using the web interface, it's actually going to be a lot nicer dashboard, kind of consolidating all of the results that make it a bit more readable and manageable. And that's going to get us into the Skill Builder lab. So I will, before we go into the actual lab itself, say that Skill Builder has a ton of content that is within the free tier that everybody can leverage. So whether you are trying to get more familiar with the VMware agent or the .NET agent or the mainframe agent, there is going to be Transform kind of getting started and a little bit of a deeper dive that is all, they're all digital courses, which means you don't need a Skill Builder license, you just need your free tier account, and you'll be able to access those courses. There's also an assessment, which will kind of walk you through what the Transform assessment looks like, right? What's that initial phase of leveraging Transform, and what can you expect? What's not on this slide is going to be the lab walkthrough. As it's fairly new, that's what I'm going to bring up in our demo machine here. But the lab walkthrough, if we switch machines here, the lab walkthrough is going to be to modernize a .NET application with AWS Transform. This lab is going to walk through a very similar scenario of what the Hartford had to do in terms of their migration. So it's moving from .NET 4.6 over to .NET 8.0. Everything you need to do this lab is included as part of the walkthrough. I just want to make a few points very, very clear. This is something that you would be leveraging within your own accounts. The instructions are there to walk you through the process. If you follow the instructions exactly, it should not incur a charge. But if you deviate from those instructions, note that charges can ensue. So just make sure you're being very careful once you're in your own accounts. Make sure you're in a test account or some kind of sandbox environment, right? Don't do this in your production accounts to start with. But this is here. You can leverage it. You are using your own accounts for the actual tutorial. It'll also walk you through the process of disconnecting like the code repositories and the GitHub branches and all that good stuff. So it helps you with the cleanup as well. But just want to set the stage for the lab. As the lab tutorials are fairly new. If you've used Skill Builder in the past, the labs that you have done vend out a lab account for you. This one is a little bit different. It's a free tier resource, and you are doing these in your own accounts. Now, walking through the lab does take a little bit of time just because interacting with the GenAI chatbot can take time to produce results. In terms of the actual code execution or the code transformation, that part takes about 15 to 20 minutes, which would actually be about what we have left in our session. I have an example that is already run that I want to walk you through. But again, all of the steps for starting to leverage AWS Transform are part of this lab. Initial setup is making sure that your AWS Identity Center has access to AWS Transform, that you are limiting who has access to that resource. Creating a Transform job, it's having that initial conversation with the agent to say, hey, I want you to set up a transformation. In this case, it's going to be for .NET. And then it's going to walk you through the process of creating your own GitHub repo, connecting it via code pipeline to AWS Transform, and then the process of the actual transformation can begin. So again, I encourage you, call to action, go and take this lab once you have some time, maybe time between sessions at reInvent. But here we have, well, let's just go to the workspaces so you see the full breakdown here. This is AWS Transform. This is what it's going to look like when you are in the actual environment. You'll notice on the left-hand side there, it says 800,000 hours of overall work time has been saved using Transform since it got released in May. So quick math, 800,000 hours, like 90-something years. I think, somebody can correct my math if I'm wrong, and over 1.1 billion overall lines of code processed. Billion with a B, that's insane. That's just insane. Okay, so when you're using Transform, you're going to create a workspace. This is how you allocate individuals to be collaborating in the same space. So in this case, we have a workspace already set up for that Skill Builder lab. Once we go into the workspace, we can actually see the history of what I said to the GenAI chatbot to interact with it. So initially, it was just saying, hey, I'm a helpful AI assistant for your migration process. What do you need? All we had to say was, we are in need of migrating a .NET application, right? Create a .NET to .NET Core transformation project, and then it handled the rest, right? I said this, and it created a job for us. And the interface looks a little bit different as of today. But if we just close all of these out for a second, I guess they're closed. It's going to start with getting resources. So this is where you're going to go ahead and allocate the individual permissions for the folks that are going to be working, right? The migration team. You're going to choose your connector type. You can connect to a lot of different resources, GitHub probably being the most popular, and then connect to that source code repository via some kind of connector. In the lab example, you are using code pipeline as your connector mechanism. So you're connecting to a GitHub repo via code pipeline. Once you go through and connect the resources, it is going to go through that assessment phase. It's going to discover resources for the transformation. If we scroll this one back here, we actually gave it 2 separate repositories. We can choose which repositories we want to assess and therefore transform. And if we jump back here, then we can go into the prepare for transformation phase. And again, this is all run through already. And I will show you the output, which is probably the most important part. But we can choose what we actually want to transform. In the labs instance, we actually only ended up transforming one of the repos just from a timing perspective. This was about 5,000 lines of code, plus or minus. But it went ahead and transitioned 5,000 lines of code from .NET 4.8 to .NET 8.0. It also is going to include some human-in-the-loop feedback, so you can actually be a mechanism for approval. You're not just saying, hey, GenAI, do this all for me. Oftentimes, you need to have a conversation. You need to have the team assessing what needs to be migrated when. Wave planning is important. So you need to review and start the transformation, which is, hey, these are the suggested changes that Transform is going to invoke. Are you OK with that? Choose the repositories you want to apply it to, and then you're good to go, right? A lot of this you can do via the interface and just add in the connectors, add in the repos. You can also do it entirely by chatting with the agent. The actual transform job, once it's completed, you'll have an output. I have downloaded the output so that we can look at it. But in this case, there were 6 total projects within the repository that it needed to transform. It had a variety of NuGet packages that needed to be added or updated or removed. Files added, updated, removed. It gives you the whole breakdown there. Most importantly, it gives you the framework and dependency changes that were all done within that transformation process. If I'm remembering correctly, and I'm sure it says on our output here, but this transition, it was 5,000 lines of code, took about 11 minutes, 12 minutes. So at scale. And this can all be done in parallel. So at scale, this process can make your life, hopefully, a lot easier. That's the goal. OK. That is, I believe, the main components of the lab that I wanted to talk through. I'm glad we were able to pull that up. Again, the user interface, as of yesterday, is a little bit different than what will be in those lab tutorials. It is fairly self-explanatory what the equivalent tabs are. It's just a little bit of a nicer interface now, and some more nice dashboards in terms of visualization for the outputs of the transform jobs. But the lab still works in its entirety. I encourage you at some point within the conference to go through the lab tutorial. OK, my friends, that is pretty much all I had for this session. So to get started with Transform, again, Skill Builder is going to be your friend. There are those digital courses that will get you started in terms of your knowledge bases. Hopefully, we got you a good starting point in this session. And then you can go into that lab tutorial that you can do in your own AWS accounts. Q&A, obviously, with the headphones on, it'll be a little harder to do. So once we're done with the session, I will be over here for a few minutes. In case anybody has any questions, we can always move out into the hallway if we are running low on time, if we're getting pushed out for another session. But thank you very much, folks. It has been an absolute pleasure. Again, I hope you are excited to use Transform. And please fill out the survey if you have a chance. That's how I continue to feed Kenai. All right. Thank you, folks.